Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. And as Shilpa said, this is our last alumni career panel for this semester, social work and addiction. I'm happy to welcome our 4 alumni here today to talk about opportunities, careers, challenges in working with addiction. Maybe to start us off here, if we could just have each of you introduce yourselves, a little bit about where you are working and the scope of your work.
Starting here, okay. I'm Claudia Oberweger, and I graduated from this program from the Silver School when I graduated in 1988. And that was 20 years after I finished college, so I was a returning student. And I discovered that having wrinkles is a good thing for this profession. It's really good. So, because people think you're wise, so it's easy. But anyway, shall I answer some of these questions? Is that where you want to go?
Yeah, we'll come through.
Anyway, so that's who I am, and I'm glad to be here.
My name is Catherine Werner. I graduated from the School of Social Work here at NYU in 2007 and again in 2008. I'm an LCSW and I'm currently a clinical director, so a social work administrator for a program called Bridge Back to Life, which is an outpatient substance abuse program in the boroughs.
I'm Sharon Sakai. I'm an LCSW and a KSAC, and I've been in the field of addiction for like 20 years. I graduated from here in 2007, and I've been working at the Israel Hospital in an inpatient chemical dependency rehab. And I've been there as a counselor, I've been there as a family therapist, and I'm going to retire next year, so.
Hi, my name is Tom Gordon. I graduated last May from NYU Silver School. I was part of the Focused Learning Opportunity Program in substance abuse and co-occurring disorders. I interned last year at Catholic Charities Outpatient Treatment Center in Newburgh, New York. And I'm currently enjoying a little bit of rest before I take my LMSW exams and my KSAC exams, which the beauty of the Focused Learning Opportunity Program, it gives you a track to qualify for both programs, which because I think it's at least 1,000 to 2,000 more hours of the process.
Thanks, Tom. And maybe you mentioned something, Tom, and I think I heard this theme that coming to social work program in some cases, maybe all was a career change or another decision as life progressed. Tom, could you start us off maybe and tell us what brought you into the social work program?
Well, I had a long career of almost 30 years working in business. And I knew for a long period of time that, at least the last 10 years, that I wanted to do something that felt more rewarding. I realized I had acquired certain skill sets that were good at problem solving, and I had my own personal journey that I wanted to share, particularly with other young men. So I finished I did things somewhat backwards. I finished my undergraduate degree in 2011 with an absence of 31 years. And then, unbeknownst to me, I was going to go pursue my KSAC certification, and a friend of mine twisted my arm and told me that getting my MSW would be a much better idea. So that was the track that I followed.
Great, thanks, Tom.
I'll be very honest, when I entered the substance abuse field, I really thought I could get away with the KSAC. Just do the training, boom, and that was it. I had no intentions of actually going to college. But while I worked there, I ended up getting my bachelor's at Empire State, and then I came here for my social work degree, and I'm really glad I took the advice of my supervisor to expand my education beyond the KSAC.
I came into the BSW program at NYU, so I came into the field out of high school and applied to baccalaureate programs with a concentration in social work, feeling that there were a lot of people, particularly at that time in my life, who needed help, and the school social workers seemed to be someone that was a resource. And she shared in school that she had done work in women's prison and some other places, and I was like, what kind of psychology is that? When I took an elective, and she's like, oh no, it's not, it's social work. So I knew that that was the work that I sort of felt drawn to. And then in terms of my substance abuse work. My BSW placement was at the program that I currently work at now, and I went and I fell in love with it, and I've been there for the last 10 years.
Wow, great, Catherine, thank you. And Claudia?
Yeah, I was a sociology major in college, and psychology minor if there was here, because I went to NYU undergraduate downtown, which there's an uptown and a downtown. But I found that social work sort of combined my interest in psychology and sociology, because I was always interested in looking at the world from those lenses anyway. And social work was sort of the perfect thing. But I did my CAC, before it was a KSAC, it was a CAC, which I got in 1984. And I got interested in substance abuse because of a family issue. I participated in a structured intervention with a loved one. And that was what started my interest, particularly in substance abuse. So I got my CAC in 1984, and at first I volunteered. There was no program like the one that exists now, which is great. And I accumulated all those hours through volunteer work at Smithers, rehab, etc. And then I took the exam. But I knew that I needed more training. It was obvious that I needed a master's at least. Because to have the wisdom to do this stuff is really hard. So that's how it started.
Great, thank you, Claudia. We put a question out here to the panel. I'm hoping or want to make sure that each of you will be able to provide some insight into this. So anyone who wants to jump in first, go ahead. What was, in beginning your career in social work, after getting your MSW, what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered? Also, maybe some of the biggest surprises, either things that, were positive or things that maybe you weren't counting on confronting or coming up against. Anyone want to start us off there?
I think one of the things that was clear, especially having interned when I was young as a DSW intern, was that my age was very clear to the people that I was working with. A lot of times when I would facilitate a group or go in, I'm your counselor, the first question was, yeah, but how old are you? There was some legitimacy to be earned, and it was challenging. I felt, especially even as a female, substance abuse, you're certainly going to see a diverse population, but a lot of times you have males, sometimes they're offenders, meaning they're coming from diversion programs or out of jails, or they're mandated. So sitting and really understanding what my clinical presence was going to be like, and sort of answering this question, which I learned over time, which was how can you help me? When realistically what it looked like they were saying was you can't help me, and really understanding the therapeutic value of what they were bringing in the room, which was being concerned about who was I, and who, use the word wisdom, which I thought was important. How could I really do something when it was maybe a person who was 60 years old sitting across from me, and that they had concern that my life experience wasn't going to be helpful to them. And then to talk to surprises, I've loved this field because of the resiliency of humans. Working with people who, for whatever reason, are deeply hurting and find a way to be deeply connected through a process of recovery. Sharing something about what happens when you change, when you choose to really change your core, which is really what recovery work looks like. I'm, like I said, I've been 10 years with this program that I work at, and I'm still deeply moved by the emotion that comes with the process of getting well in addictions and program industries.
That's great. Thank you for that, Catherine.
I'm sorry, I just want to echo what you said about the resilience of humans. That this is a treatable illness. It's been mishandled by some professionals, I think, for many years. And one in particular, I think, one group, the psychoanalytic point of view, was not useful in dealing with substance abuse. Maybe I'm being very impolitic to say that. But I think that people can get better from this, and people are incredibly resilient if you stick with it. It requires a lot of consistent work and love. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I'd just like to say that because my background was really as a substance abuse counselor, that getting the social work perspective had to change the way that I actually treated my patients. Because one of the main tools we use in substance abuse is confrontation. And it's very much the here and now, what's going on now. So I think having the social work background really allowed me, as I'm dealing with it here and now about not picking up a drug, about something about their past, which I had to learn a way of weaving that in, because we only see these patients for 2 weeks to 4 weeks. I don't know what's going to happen. They could leave and go use. So I have to be very economical on what I do with them, so that it's just not going on and on and on and on about your background and they go out and they use. Because if you open up certain doors about their past on an inpatient rehab, chances are they might leave AMA, or they'll be like half open when they leave, and that's perfect time to use. So I think that having the social work background really made me better, actually a better clinician of how do I balance off not using as opposed to all the abuse you've had in your life and trying to make that connection about human development. So it's been a little tricky sometimes, because part of me gets very enthusiastic about it, and I have to say, well, Sharon, you only have them for another week. So you have to really kind of chill out with that and still be effective. So that's been very challenging.
Thank you, Sharon. I hear a theme in there too that really resonates with meeting the client where they are, really the whole biopsychosocial dimension of their life, and treating them as a full, complete person, understanding what they value, where they come from, where they might be wanting to go after, different from person to person.
And I just wanted to add to that. I thought, all the theories, the modalities of intervention are all well and good, but the most important thing that I found, and I worked at an inner city outpatient rehab where most of the clients were mandated as a result of some infractions through the legal system, that almost none of them wanted to be there. So the most important thing was trying to create that therapeutic alliance that they tell us about. So basically, it's how do I connect to somebody? How do I try to establish a conversation? Because, it's kind of obvious that I'm rather older than most people here. I'm definitely white, and most of my clientele was not. And even though I may have had some experiences that I could draw back on from my own youth and through my own mentoring of other young men and my own children, creating that connection was the most important thing. And as my colleague had pointed out, we're often up against the limitations of time. Time is really, a lot of the interventions would work if we had unlimited amount of time or even more time. But we have such little time that oftentimes it's like triage. How can we sit there? How can we, try to address the immediate needs and maybe just kind of move them along the idea, similarly to motivational therapy, where we just try to move them along to the next place, because oftentimes we found in our clinic that we'd see the client at least 3 times. So yeah, it was very trying, and I am absolutely amazed. I thought I was going to teach these young men about the meaning of life. And they have opened my eyes. I have seen strength that it stunned me, it's brought me to tears in therapy sessions, and if I saw if these young men just had a chance. I saw one fellow I talked to, I won't mention his name, he had a 1450 on his SATs, but he was a drug dealer. Now if I could take that guy with my business background and 2 other guys, and these young men would challenge me, and I thought they were brilliant. If they just had a chance, what could you do with them?
Or a student evolving into a social work professional? Anything that helped you in particular, maybe in your career paths?
Well, I think in addition to, I think it's important if you're a social worker in the addiction field to get KSAC, because there are some social workers that don't have KSACs. But I think it's really good to have very specific credentials in substance abuse. And the other thing is to go to 12-step meetings, because that's the culture. Because when they leave, aside from doing outpatient work and so on and so forth, that is the culture. And because your patients who have, been in 12 steps, a lot of their lingo, a lot of their concepts come from the 12 steps. And anyone can go to a 12-step meeting. If you go on the computer and you look it up, you look for open meetings. You know, you don't go to a closed, I mean, obviously if you're not an addict, you can go to a closed meeting, but you go to an open meeting, go to Al-Anon meetings, to learn about the families of the addicts, because when you have that person in front of you, there's a whole family background there. It's really, because a lot of their stuff has to do with their family. So, I mean, that's not a professional thing, but I think it's really important to hit the 12-step meetings.
I would agree with that. I think the 12-step, it's really CBT of another name. And there's also a program called Smart Recovery, which doesn't have this so-called spirituality of the 12-step program, but it is basically the same stuff. But I've been in the field so long that, you know, people threw the baby out with the bathwater years ago. At first, codependency was invented when I got in the field, and then it's been tossed aside. So it's kind of, but basically, if you go to a 12-step meeting, you will hear people talking and sharing about their life and how their lives have been affected. And any of the 12-step meetings, any of them. Family meetings, there's also Families Anonymous, which is another good place to go because you hear parents talking about their children, and that's very useful.
Tom or Catherine, anything further on 12-step or involvement with support or professional development that you would recommend?
I think being able to speak the language is important. So I think, to mirror what everyone's saying, 12-step meetings are important. Being able to understand kind of the culture. I also find other professionals in the field are always a great resource. So things like, I know like LinkedIn and like NASW, they have like specific like groups where you can really be like focused on a field or on a particular concept. And I think that sometimes staying connected to other professionals who are evolving, especially in substance abuse over time, what you find is drugs change and the patterns of drugs change. Especially somewhere where in the middle of like an opiate epidemic, so Staten Island and Long Island and some of the other boroughs that are really heavily affected, it's important to know what's going on and finding out from my peers in the field that certain drugs were being cut with other drugs and overdoses were happening. Those things are important to be aware of as well.
I just wanted to add, I agree with everything that my colleagues have shared, but I would also emphasize that if you were going to go into this field, that AA or NA, you would get a good basis of 12-step programs, and certainly going into Al-Anon is a wonderful adjunct as well. But I would also, in time, suggest you try out Overeaters Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous or SA, which I doubt has open meetings, but to understand that there are other programs where people deal with other addictions that I've had almost 40 experience through my own journey through a lot of these the key programs, but I'm shocked at the other dimension that we can get, particularly with Overeaters Anonymous, to see the dimension that people go to kind of self-regulate, and I could approach my therapeutic approach would be misguided, not understanding the nuances of these kind of things. So I'd suggest that, and also colleagues are invaluable. In the clinic I worked at, I've got a certain amount of supervision, but the colleagues I work with were absolutely amazing.
In working with substance addiction or even behavioral addictions, I believe Claudia may have brought up the dimension, the added dimension of family. Maybe it was Sharon, I'm not sure. Could any of you speak a little bit to, in terms of social work too, not looking just beyond the person who is seeking treatment or maybe was mandated for treatment, but when you meet someone who is struggling with an addiction, chances are there are a lot of people connected who are struggling with the same addiction,
I would say.
directly or indirectly.
Yeah, I think the family or close significant others are the most important in dealing with addiction. The way I was trained initially was a much more tough love, and the person has to hit bottom and let go of the results and not be controlling and not being an enabler. But more recently, there are programs like the CRAFT program for families, which I wrote down what it stands for, if I find it, which is Community Reinforcement and Family Training. And it's really a wonderful program. It is social work. It is family therapy. You bring in the addict and their family, and with love and wisdom, you help the family change, everyone change. Because it's like a mobile, the disease of substance abuse is like a mobile, and they all balance each other. The dysfunction of one is compensated by the other, the functionality or the hyperfunctionality of another. And if you change that balance, recovery can begin to start.
Yeah.
You really can.
Candidly, a lot of the times, if you miss the family, you miss the resources. And sometimes families are not available, which is a hardship. But I think treating addiction as a family disease is important. I'll say a lot of times in group or individual, like, the client will struggle because my wife or my so-and-so doesn't get it. Well, you're in treatment 5 days a week and they're not. So let's talk about ways to kind of bridge the gap. You have resources differently in your recovery. How do you connect your family to things like Al-Anon and other support? One of the things that we do at our program is we have the ability to take significant others in as primary clients. So if your loved one is an alcoholic and it's affecting your life, which generally it is, you can come and get your own therapy from a substance abuse professional because they understand what the systems look like. Fixing a client and sending them into a broken family is a challenging thing, because what happens is they're going to come back with symptomology of a broken family, which is either as a result of their addiction or creating some of the maladaptive coping. But families it's an important part, and families being together. There's a number of programs, especially there's a program, a FISC program, which is Families in Supportive Treatment, who advocate for patient benefits, where clients are getting kicked out of rehabs because they don't have enough time, or detoxes because they don't have enough time, for families to have a voice and saying, like, I sit with this person and they're suffering and I need to advocate for them to be in treatment, and for families to support each other through a process of overdose and support. And what does life look like now? The person in recovery is not the only person recovering. When they choose to make the choice to come in and get well, the whole family system generally shifts. And so important to pay attention to.
Great, thank you.
On the inpatient rehab, I work with families. They come in and they do sessions. And I think that overall what I really witnessed is it's very hard to work with families, because the drug addict is one who has the obvious problem. So very often they go do your treatment, get better, everything will be fine. And what families have difficulty understanding is that they've had to maneuver their lives according to the drug addict. And so they develop these patterns of behavior which are actually not conducive for recovery. Very often the newly sober addict goes home, and there's this feeling like there's supposed to be this miraculous change, and there really isn't. Very often families are so afraid of them relapsing, they start to treat them as if they're still using. I've had many patients come back into treatment, and I'll say, well, what happened? And they said, well, my mother kept complaining that I was using, so I got sober. And they'd say, well, they kept treating me like I was using, so I figured I might as well just use, And I know what's tricky about working with the family is that because they are, at least in my facility, they are not the patient. They are coming to assist their patient, their family member. So I have to be very careful how I work with them. I just can't come out and say, well, you've got a problem too. You have to kind of find out where they're coming from. And a lot of them have had experiences in their lives with someone else, like a grandmother or somebody else like that. So it's not saying that you have to work with kid gloves, but you can't defend them, because then it's going to be, oh, I'm siding with the addict, So you have to really kind of work with them to help them to understand how are they contributing to what's going on in the home. And in the population I work with, I'd say maybe 50% of my patients come from generation after generation of addiction. So they're also affected a little bit differently than when the family are non-addicts, because this is just something that they've seen over and over and over again. So it's very tricky working with the families, you know, but the patients are the ones that get into treatment. And I always remind them that, so I give them a lot of education on families, you know, to help them to communicate with their family differently. And a lot of times they'll say, well, if they keep bugging you, just let them bug you. Don't forget, they're hurt, they're scared. If they root for you and you relapse again, they're going to be disappointed again. So I tell them, just let them do what they have to do, and then you have to do what you have to do. So it's a lot about the boundaries in the family.
The challenge that I faced in my recent placement is many of the clients didn't know, they didn't have an intact, mother and father family. So, to try to work with the family was tenuous at best. It was almost more the community at large, which is where they, whether or not they were involved in gang activity or things like that. It was to try to look at the whole system itself. And as my colleague had just pointed out about the intergenerationality of it it's fascinating. How far back does it go? Does it go back 3 generations, or has it always been that way in some way? Because if you look at it, somewhat crassly, you realize that zebras will produce zebras, and I mean that empathetically. How do you sit down and break the chain of that? Because when you have somebody whose parents are addicted to any sort of drugs or any sort of compulsion, their primary relationship is with that substance. So when we talk about as students and we learn about attachment disorders and things like that, they're all, they figure out, the idea of microaggressions, but that you have these thousands and upon thousands of instances when these children were just left wondering, hey, what happened to me? Where's mommy and daddy? And then, in my placement, we might not even know what daddy is, and oftentimes, having read the new Jim Crow, and the students are familiar about war on drugs, which is absolutely, it's morbidly fascinating and reprehensible. But many of my young clients, their parents, their father, and mothers oftentimes are both in jail or in the system. So it's complicated. How do you sit down and then we're up against the limitations of time, a stack of paperwork, but it's.
For Silver students, current Silver students who are interested or have the opportunity, there is an elective in the curriculum called Clinical Practice with Substance Abusers and Their Families. And just FYI, entails in the assignments attending 12-step meetings, a lot of reading and discussion around family and sort of the extended ecology of the substance user. Something to keep in mind. Some heavy topics here. Tom, you mentioned that sometimes in sessions with clients, tears come to your eyes. Let me ask a question, put it out here for each of you to ask. Where do you go for advice? Who do you turn to when you just need to process? What mechanisms are in place? Where do you look?
I'm fortunate to have a number of friends and colleagues in the field, and to sit down and run things past them, particularly if I feel like I feel unbalanced or I'm agitated. And I don't think we get into this field without being passionate about what we're doing. And essentially in ways, and I'm new at this, and I can take on a lot. And I'm not making this change in my life because I'm kind of ambivalent about it. But basically, we take on society's pains in some ways, and how do we do that without, having our own putting our own stuff on the client? And I certainly came in with an agenda. I had this all figured out before I went to school. I had the Tom Gordon intervention, and if you do what I did, everything would be great. And I've had to learn the hard way, which is the only way I learn. And I learned that through my colleagues. I have never admitted to anything the first time around, but I go home and think about it. And the professors here are absolutely, I found the school has been available to me almost within hours if I had an issue, which is why I chose to go here. from other metropolitan schools. They have been available to me. I've connected with 2 of my professors today. So those of us, I think, that work in the field, I think we'll bend over backwards to support each other.
I really agree with you about this school being very available from my experience here. And I'm glad to hear that's still the case. Because if I had it wasn't only about substance abuse, it was about life and having 2 little kids at home and being able to change a placement because I had to leave the house before my kids went to school. I mean, it would have been impossible. And I always found I was able to get what I needed in this program, which made the difference for me. It really made it possible for me to do this. Also, Lala Strausner used to run, does she still run that program or she's retired?
But she's still teaching here. I'm not sure about the program.
Because she was in charge of that program, substance abuse, and, right? Originally.
Yes, that's with Professor Fuel, Christine Fuel, and
yeah.
Allison Aldridge.
Yes, yes. But Strausner, Lala Strausner, did a chart of the family and addiction years ago that I saw. I don't know who published it, maybe 30 years ago, which informed the way I thought about this whole process. And it was somebody here. And also, I've always been in peer supervision or my own therapy when I'm doing this work. I really can't say that. I can't tell people anything more honest than that. Because it's really important to sort out your feelings when you're working with individuals. It's important.
I think that having good supervision for me was really something that connected me to the field and kept me in the field. Looking for places that have supervisors who really are invested in the development of their staff is important. Coming in and struggling, and there are days where you are so raw and connected to what's happening, and it's visceral, and you're a human, and you're like sitting with it, and someone's screaming, and or whatever's happening, and you have to have a good network to be a person, to just be a human. And I have stayed in touch with many of my peers from school. We do some peer supervision. I stay in touch with supervisors from other places that I feel know the struggle. I mean, there's nothing like sitting, we sat down for 5 minutes together before, and you're like, oh my God, and you know, and you just sort of feel the sparks flying. Because people who work in it and know it, you get it, and you know, like we said before about speaking the language, and I think your support needs to speak the language. You need to remember you're human. You need to remember your limitations. You have to do, if I don't say the word self-care to all my therapists every day, like, what did you do? I saw you doing paperwork here late last night, go home, watch a movie, go outside, walk around, breathe, drink some water. You have to remember that you have to replenish yourself. When you work in addictions, because it's a field so much about like control and like giving, that you have to replenish. You have to at some point like dump it out and start all over. And I think that those are things that are really essential. And laughing, like you can't do this work and not find some level of humor in it, and the just complete wildness of some of it, and the challenges that come, and sitting with my colleagues. We have a staff meeting every week, and we just start for the first 4 minutes and just like laugh and then like move. It's a field that will charge your batteries, but it's also going to drain them. So those things have always been essential to me. I don't know how I would do it without having someone to be like, do you know what just happened? And being able to move on from that point.
Great, thank you.
I think also it's on an individual level to realize that number one, you're not going to save the addict. Your return is not that, oh, they're sober. I think what's really important is that you're making some kind of a relationship, because that's really what's missing is a substantial relationship. So even if you get the same patient over and over again, sometimes they'll say, oh, Sharon, I remember what you told me like 2 sessions before or something, right? So I think it's not one of those helping things where you're going to see any kind of an immediate result. And also accept the fact that you're going to have patients that die. That's the bottom line. And it's very easy to feel guilty about, maybe I could have said it differently. So we start to do a lot of self-doubt. And I think it's really important that we kind of deflate our egos, because we're not going to really save the addict from using. All we can do is make a connection. And also, to acknowledge the fact that you will be affected. You know, we work a lot with boundaries, but countertransference is always happening. And if you're getting that feeling, go to one of your colleagues, just go into their office and say, look, I gotta, run something by you. And then you realize that what you're going through is some kind of countertransference. So you've got to really be in tune with yourself, and we're all susceptible to the same thing that your patient is susceptible to. We're all susceptible to unresolved grief, to trauma, to loss of jobs, to broken families. Well, anything that can happen to an addict can actually happen to us, and we have to remember that. Just because they're using drugs doesn't mean that only certain problems happen to them. Well, that'll never happen to me. And if it's something that you're not familiar with, that's okay too. You don't have to necessarily incorporate everything that the addict goes through. And I just also want to say this about working with drug addicts. It's very, very intuitive. You can't really fake and spurn. You couldn't even let your patient know, I have really a lot of difficulty working with you. You can tell that they'd appreciate that rather than you're pretending to care about them when really everything they just told you, you don't want to hear it anymore. They really appreciate the honesty. And I've said to patients, when you first came in here, I really thought you were going to leave the next day and I was going to be very happy when you left. Here you are 15 days later. So then you acknowledge that they've made some kind of change. And I think what Catherine and I were talking about earlier, you gotta laugh. You gotta laugh. And that's not being mean or judgmental, but you gotta have some dark humor when you work in this field. Really.
Thanks very much for that. Before we open up to general questions for our panel here, I'll make one plug for the National Association of Social Workers. If you are a student, I think $48 a year.
It's
second Wednesday.
So.
Yeah, second Wednesday of every month, the Addictions Committee meets. It's an open meeting that anyone can attend if you're a member at 50 Broadway. Take 4 or 5 to Wall Street and walk a block.
And it's good to show if you're in the flow program because your professor often attends the meeting. Just saying extra points if you don't feel like writing a scholar paper. It's a good idea.
Great. How about if we open up to questions? Yes.
I have a question. First, thank you so much. For Catherine and Tom, that you mentioned that there sometimes will be differences in age, race, or gender, or something like that. How is it that you would establish yourself as, I know what I'm doing, or something like that?
You can go first.
I think being good at what you do speaks for itself. A lot of times bringing the question in the room solves the answer, which is, let's identify there's a difference between me or you or whoever the case is. I'm young, you're not, I'm old, you're not. My race, whatever people can assume from my outside, call a spade and work through it has always been something that's been really helpful to me. And a lot of times I've assured patients, there's something more than what you're asking me. You're trying to find out something, and similar to what I said before, which is can you trust me, can I help you? And once you can work through that, and someone has a moment where I think Sharon spoke a lot about connecting, when someone can kind of get connected to the fact that you know what you're doing, you can help them resolve some of the trust level, which I think is generally what is calling that question. And also you need to be aware that differences do affect. As much as we want to say my race or my age or my gender doesn't affect the way that my client sees me, it does. And a lot of times having candid conversations about those things are ways to kind of equalize what's happening inside the room.
I agree with everything she said. I walk from it, and I also get the idea where I may be older than their parents by far. So I think one thing that helps me is my sense of awareness of people's affect, and I'm intensely curious. So I'll ask a lot of questions that have nothing to do, about the matter at hand or present an issue, but about them and about their lives, and try to circumnavigate. And it's not a blueprint. Sometimes some children are easy. I had one student who used to want to just put her head down, and it bugged me for months. And I had her in group therapy, and she had a number of cultural challenges and all that. And it dawned on me while I was meditating over this, because I didn't know how to reach her, that she used to draw these anime characters. supervisor used to scold her and so on and so forth. And I had missed that for 3 months, and I went in and I apologized to her. I says, I totally blew it. You've been talking to me. And then it just blew the lid off, and that's the kind of thing is there's always opportunities, and sometimes we run down, we miss them, but to be intensely aware of what's going on, and for me that's been very helpful.
Genuine curiosity. Intense
Well, because we come in and there's this puzzle. You know, for me there's this puzzle and there's these layers, and how do we get in and out? And, you know, as you mentioned, the family system. To me, I'm fascinated by all of that. I'm really truly fascinated by it.
What you said, can I just say, you said be aware and authentic, I think. Those the two A's. I mean, it's really true.
They know right away.
Because they know right away.
If I ever had an off day, you walk in and everyone's like, what's wrong? Everyone's heard it before and they're like, you're not right today. There's a serious like empathetic and intuitive response, and sometimes you can't hide it. And there are things where I just make like, you're right, I have a headache, or you're right, or, you know, let's refocus. And you want to obviously bring it back to the patient, but they don't miss a beat.
And if we're uncomfortable, and these people, you know, our clients come in and they really, my guys do not want to be there. If I'm uncomfortable with them, and we don't have a lot visually in common, and I will, you know, maybe broach protocol and bring it up right away. Okay, I get it. I look like a cop. You know, let's say that. I'm white. I'm old. I'm large. Okay, what does that mean? Let's, you know, because you know, it's like the elephant in the room. You know, let's not spend. You know, we don't have 8 sessions to go through this and pretend, and you're going to sit there and not look at me. Or I've dealt with that in the public school internet. But let's just talk about it because it's real. You know, I get it. We're not different. So how can we get around this? Ask me some questions. What do you want to know? You know, do you hate that I look like this? It's okay. That's fine.
There's only so much.
You know, that's great. I mean, you know, and from your experiences, I would hate me too. You know, from what I've learned in social work school, I'm not so proud about what goes on and what I see. So I guess let's talk about that. You know, so that you see, and you're smiling. So that kind of opens up a conversation instead of, okay, is there another parole officer? Yeah, I don't like him. Nice haircut.
Differentiating treatment and punishment is also important, especially with the mandated guys and ladies. That it's important to be able to know that there's that, you know, you have a reporting generally requirement, meaning like I have to talk to your PO. You know, let's talk about it. In my first couple of sessions, I always say like, if I'm lucky, I can keep my guys for my gentlemen and my ladies for like 6 months to a year. So I have the opportunity to have time, depending on what I can do, but I have to call your PO if you don't show up. That's a layer of a relationship that you want to kind of call right out on the spot. Like I need to talk to ACS, I need to talk to your family member, I need to talk to whomever is supervising your case. Those things are important. And being kind of transparent in that way. Consistency was a word we said before, consistency and expectations. When someone knows what's going to happen next, it's easier for them to make better decisions, healthier decisions. So if they know that they missed and they're going to call, I'm going to call their PO, well then maybe that's going to help them develop the consequential thinking they're going to need to make better choices along the road. If I enable them, if I hide it under the rug, I'm doing something maybe someone else in their family has done for many years, or in their world has done, which is enable them or let them get away with something when really what they need to do is start to learn that the world isn't going to make things impossible for them if they make some good decisions about where they're next.
Tough one, actually.
I mean, I think knowing the goals of where you are is generally where you start. So for example, my organization works from an abstinence model. So working for a place where you believe in the work that they're doing. Programs have harm reductions or needles exchanges. If that's a place where you are, that you believe in the mission and you follow, that your goals are in line with the organization that you work for. That's generally been, you know, sort of the premise. I think that there's a reality where I say to patients, when you walk in the door, I don't think all of a sudden your addiction is absolved, that you're in drug treatment and you stopped using. That there's a level of, I think, some type of harm reduction in all work, other than maybe when you're putting someone into rehab. The reduction is called like, here you are now, and you can leave. But there are people who are going to test positive, people are going to relapse. I think really the model is about the environment that you're in and what you're comfortable with.
I would say some of those questions about abstinence and harm reduction can be answered by going to some 12-step meetings, going to AA meetings and hearing how people struggle with it. And ultimately, abstinence helps them more. I mean, that's generally what happens. And you hear greater, a sense of I don't know, resolution when they understand that. But it's for them to understand. So that you can learn some of that. I think if you go to 12-step meetings, you will hear it.
It's an individual, typical to what type of drug use, how pronounced it is or it's not. So if you go with the 12-step model, one of their mantras is either change or die. If you're that far along the addiction curve, you don't have that many more chances, or a drinking curve. I mean, when the 12-step model was put together, you only dealt with low bottom drunks who had, these are the type of people that were institutionalized and so on and so forth. Now, I may see a young man who, ancillary to his crime was smoking marijuana. So how do you deal with that? Now these young guys, it's going to be legal. What's the point? And I have kids and young men and women too. The arguments are just great, and that's a valid argument at some point in time. So here we have the harmony. We want to keep them out of violating their probation, because when they get caught up in the system, it's the goofiest crime, shoplifting or something else like that, which society doesn't condone, and neither do I, especially if you're shoplifting my stuff. But here they get caught up in the system, and then they violate probation. And then they wind up doing time, and then they get caught up, and then it just spirals down, and it's just awful. So the harm reduction is, I think you need to look at particular drugs. Can you really do harm reduction with heroin, which is methadone with a needle exchange program, but are you going to try to have somebody harm reduction, well, just do heroin on Fridays? And how do you control the efficacy of it? And if you look at the European models, I think one of the things, because this was a hot topic in our policy class, I think the white papers on that disagree that model has failed, even though they had promoted it. So there's a lot of schools of thought. The trip that Lala Strasna had to Rimini a couple of years ago, in their village in Rimini, they served wine with dinner every night. I'm like, how could you do that? That doesn't agree with the idea that you can still drink wine, but that's cultural to Italy. Over here, if you took somebody in the AA program, yes, that's the rehab I want. To serve wine for dinner, forget the food, I'll eat dinner 3 times a day and I'll be good. That's it.
And I think a lot of it has to go to the quality versus the quantity. The idea of what is the effect of substances on your life, and is it worth sometimes the gamble of not working from an abstinence space to say that, well, marijuana is going to be legal, but alcohol is legal and people are still alcoholic. So it's about somebody's journey to understand, even if I drink once a month, but once a month I get arrested and I drive my car through a wall and my spouse fights with me and I lose my keys and I show up late to work, I'm going to argue that might indicate some substance use disorder, because what's happening before that, and I think it's really about looking at your patient and their context and understanding what are the underlying issues that really addiction is about, which is sometimes the way my brain is working, right, at its core and its chemistry, and the way that I'm coping with the world around me, which is sort of how things become behavioral.
I think that would help me, because I work in an abstinence-based rehab, but some of my patients will go back to harm reduction programs. What's really helped me is the social work concept of self-determination. You ask the patient, how is this working for you? Find out from the patient. What is your idea of going to harm reduction? Find out from the patient, and maybe at this point in time, that's what's working for them. We always go to the patient and ask them, we have a lot of, Beth Israel is very into methadone maintenance. Of course, a lot of the patients that are rehab are on methadone maintenance. So the question is, how is it working for you? And you find out that some of them are actually afraid to come off of methadone maintenance. We have to stop. Okay, that's it.
Do we have time for one more question? No, one more question.
My question is in regards to the case act. I have my case IT already, and I wanted to know if you guys have any advice or suggestions in obtaining the, I just need the experience portion, so maybe you guys can work on the inside of the show.
Are you a first year student or?
No, second. Part of the 16-month program.
So are you doing an internship?
I went to, my internship now is for like outpatient, it's a fellows program, but I wanted to look more into getting my experience after I finished the program. I was just thinking in regards to, when I first got the exact I started to apply, but I wasn't getting any response, and I didn't know if that was because of maybe my prior education, my experience or something, so I wanted to know, like, what is it that, how do you get your experience, I guess, my question is.
Well, you have to, when you look at facilities, find out if they will hire you with a case act.
So would it be more on like as a paid employee, or should I do it in regards to like an internship or like a volunteer?
Well, you have to find out what they offer. Some places won't take you with a case act.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're going, and I think in terms of application, if there are times where I've hired someone with a case act, it's their credential and that's they have the experience. Depending on the outcome, an internship isn't a terrible idea, specific to what you're working in or looking for, but I think it would be maybe a good idea to contact some places that you've had an interest in and get an idea. I mean, I don't think most programs do volunteer. I mean, like I don't think we would take a volunteer because of all the like credentialing requirements and fingerprinting and working with populations that OASIS does ask us to do. So it would really depend on, I think, where you're looking to be.
Because I guess my question would be, is it because I don't technically have the experience that I wasn't getting? Okay.
Don't forget the school, as we had said, the school is an amazing resource. There are professors here, that would help you give better answers than I could possibly give. Who, where, and what.
Okay.
That could help you.
Network.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. I'd like to wrap up and give great thanks to our diverse. And will you be around for a few minutes to answer questions, if any? Sure. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending today.
Thank you.